Hello, welcome to the Comic Book Commentary. I'm Bo Leidig, and this week we're going to be finding out some new information about Spawn and the finer detail points about the Spawn narrative when we talk about Spawn Blood Feud number 3. So let's zoom in and take a closer look. First published in August of 1995, we can see here on the cover Spawn featured front and center with a large stake going through his heart. Now, obviously, this is in reference to what happened at the end of issue number 2, where the men of the alleyways had kind of had enough of Spawn and the way he was treating them, and they also had come to the conclusion that Spawn was a vampire, as this was the narrative being pushed in the media by Sansker, so they decided to wait until he went to sleep and drove a stake through his heart. However, you might notice that this stake is comically huge, and it seems rather impossible that any normal-sized human could grab this thing and just use it as some sort of stabbing weapon. But I feel like that's just for effect to make it stand out and like kind of look super cool, quote unquote. Unfortunately, it does look kind of over-the-top comic booky as well. Overall, I think the cover's a little bit lacking this time around. I mean, yeah, you've got Spawn here in the middle, and he's got this kind of like cape circle around him, but behind him, it's just, colors, and the rest of the cover is just all black. There's not a whole lot going for it. Granted, I mean, it's kind of eye-catching in the sense that it's got the bright green necroplasm coming out of Spawn's chest and all, but I don't know, it just feels like this one's just a little off. It just seems like it's missing something. Story, Alan Moore. Art, Tony Daniel, Kevin Conrad. Letters, Tom Orzechowski. Color, Todd Broker. Additional thanks to Philip Timper. We see here that the story starts out in this issue with a POV from Spawn's perspective, as he's been staked through his heart, and the stake is actually pinning him to his own throne. Now keep in mind, he no longer has his symbiote costume to protect him, so the men of the alleyways were able to easily sneak up on him and get the jump on him without any resistance from Spawn at all. However, one of the men seems to realize that something's a little bit wrong here, as they were believing that the stake through the heart was going to just basically vaporize Spawn because, again, they believe he's a vampire. Spawn then starts to question, what are you guys doing? You're my friends. And the men say, yeah, you're really our friend as you sit there on that throne and push us around all the time. With friends like that, who needs enemies? And then they decide to get a gas can and start dousing Spawn with the gas. Spawn again tries to reason with them, saying, come on, guys, it's me, Al. And they respond by saying, yeah, Al is in Alucard, as in Dracula spelled backwards, which is kind of a hilarious conclusion that they just jump to that immediately. But they say then that they consider him to be nothing more than a blood-sucking leech, and the way you deal with leeches is to burn them off, as one of them lights a match as Spawn screams no, as he realizes that his friends, or who he perceived as his friends, have now turned on him, and he's not in the best of positions to defend himself. We then are treated to this really cool 2-page splash as we see the gasoline ignite, engulfing Spawn in flames. He's immediately overcome with the pain of being burned alive, even though he's technically dead. But again, he has no actual protection from any of this now that his costume's not on him. So he actually feels all of the horrible pain and sensation of the fire igniting all over his body. He then decides that this isn't where he's going to die again, and grabs the stake that's in his chest and yanks with all of his might to free himself from it pinning him to his throne. However, it is still lodged in his chest. At this point, the homeless men start to panic as they realize that Spawn is loose and they're not able to go at him one-on-one. They've seen him fight before. So they all run to try and save themselves, as they believe Spawn is now going to chase them all down and kill each one of them. However, Spawn actually has another plan. Spawn actually turns the opposite direction from the men and starts running towards the waterfront as a means to put out the fire that's engulfing him. However, one of the men realizes that this is kind of weird, as they say, wait a minute, aren't vampires supposed to be afraid of running water or something like that? Again, not realizing that Spawn's not actually a vampire and they've been led to believe something that isn't true. As we see Spawn running down the dock to try and jump into the water, which I do find it hilarious that he could have jumped into the water all the way back from the shoreline, but is instead running the entire length of the dock and completely engulfed in flame and in horrific pain to get to the end of the dock before he jumps off. Seems like kind of not the best plan. But he's also pondering in his mind the entire time, they all believe I'm a vampire and a murderer. Everybody's turned on me, my old CIA contacts, the bums of the alleyway. I have no friends left. It's always just been me trapped between the devil and the deep blue sea, as he jumps off the end of the pier, still engulfed in flames, and then is immediately extinguished when he enters the water. As he begins to sink downward, he once again starts to lose consciousness, but is again hearing the voice of the costume stating, "My name is Letha, daughter of the 7th House of K." And Spawn starts to dread the sound of that voice once again in his mind as he slowly slips out of consciousness in the water. In his dreamlike state of unconsciousness, Spawn starts to hear the voice of the costume speaking to him once again, stating that, you tore me off, you rejected me, you locked me in this box and tossed me into the dark. But I was not some brief affair. I am K7 Letha, and I am your bonded wife, essentially. That, it is the Raptor Queen of murder scarves and strangle rags, which that's just Alan Moore embellishing his writing, I suppose. And that, what we have together is a bond that's basically like love, except it's real and it lasts forever. And keep in mind, this symbiote originates from hell, so its view of different emotions is quite skewed based on that alone. We then see the next morning Spawn's hand break the surface of the water as he floats up to the top. However, this doesn't quite gel with the thing that we learned in the story of the mainline series, where Spawn apparently can't, just survive underwater. He has to actually breathe or he can drown. So it seems unlikely that he could just be underwater for that length of time, or perhaps, he's been floating the whole time, or maybe it was just a complete error in the writing, considering the mainline series is written by Todd McFarlane, and this miniseries was written by Alan Moore, and they probably just didn't get together and make sure that they were on the same page on that one piece of information. Spawn looks over and sees 2 sewage pipes and realizes that he needs a place to hide out, considering everyone is after him. And he believes that these raw sewage pipes are somewhere that no one would ever find him, because no one would ever go in such a terrible place, not even the lowest of disgusting vermin creatures, as we see him crawl into the pipe to try and hunker down and formulate a plan. However, upon entering the sewage drain, Spawn is confronted by someone else who had the same idea and is not bothered by being in this horrible place. Of course, that's the Violator, clutching a not so subtly disguised Kmart bag. Meanwhile, across town at the police precinct, we're transported to the offices of Sam and Twitch, where Sam and Twitch are discussing the hunt for Spawn and the belief that he's a vampire. And Sam just isn't buying it at this point. He states that none of it really makes sense. He talks about the fact that, if Spawn were a vampire, he wouldn't have just slain all those people and not drank their blood. And also, none of this really seems to gel with Spawn's style. He doesn't just go on random killing sprees like this. And while he doesn't like Spawn, he also was starting to hate him less, in Sam's own words. And Twitch actually starts to agree, as Sam states, it just seems like a really bad PR move on Spawn's part if he's the one who did this. And Twitch rebuttals by saying, yeah, or maybe it's a really good PR move that was perpetrated by his competition to make him look bad. As this is where we find out that Twitch is starting to assume that maybe someone else is setting Spawn up. At this point, Violator tells Spawn to grab a piece of toxic waste and have a seat. However, Spawn is quite wary of it and states, "Why, so you can attack me like you did back on the rooftop?" Now, this, of course, is in reference to when Violator betrayed Spawn back during the original Violator miniseries. But Violator states, "Nah, there's no point in killing you while you're weak like this. that would just be too easy, which doesn't really vibe with exactly what the Violator's motivations should be at this point. But I don't know. That part of the whole story just seems to not sit with me all that well. He then states that he's going to help Spawn out as he grabs onto the stake and gives it a good yank, ripping it clean out of his chest. This, of course, causes horrible pain for Spawn as we see necroplasm spraying everywhere. As Spawn tries to get his bearings, he then looks at Violator and is like, "You're helping me?" And Violator says, "Yeah, sure, our hellborn creatures have to stick together sometimes, especially now that this Sansker character seems to be after both of us, as he's also listed the Violator as an extra normal hazard." And we see that Violator here is holding a extreme hazard warning poster, much like the ones we saw of Spawn, except it shows him as the clown and in his demon form. And he states that Sansker tries to portray him as some sort of a werewolf or something of the like. But what's interesting about this is it seems like if these leaflets were being distributed all over the city, that they would have caught the eye of Jason Wynn, who did not know that Clown or Violator in his clown form existed and was surprised when Violator appeared in his office to inform Jason that he was going to be working for him. So, and again, in the timeline, you might be thinking, well, Bo, you just put out that video a few weeks ago. Didn't this happen after that? No, it didn't. And we're about to find out why in just another page. At this point, he tells Spawn that there's something about this Sansker guy that he doesn't like and that he's thinking about skipping town. Spawn states, "You really think it's going to be that easy? I've gone up against the guy. He's not human. He's from hell." And Violator states, no, he's not from hell. I'm from hell. You're from hell. If Sansker was from hell, I'd know it. As we see him start to reach into his Kmart bag and grab a few items. As we see Violator pull a hairbrush out of the bag, he then asks Spawn, "What happened to that fancy costume of yours? You finally stabbed yourself in the pecs when you crossed your arm with all those spikes?" And Spawn responds by stating that he had to get rid of it because he thinks it was something, people. There's a complete missing word in this speech bubble. Could be killing, could be hurting. He's not certain. He then states that he would have blackouts and wake up surrounded by blood, and that he fears that maybe the costume feeds off of blood. However, at this point, he's interrupted by Violator, who informs him that the costume itself feeds off of souls. This, of course, shocks Spawn as he's like, "What?" And Violator, as we see him after he's brushing out his hair and applying some makeup, states that it's one of the K series, either a K6 or K7, one of the pure breeds, and that it feeds off of souls. And then Spawn rebuttals by saying, "Well, wait, if it's not the costume that's doing all this damage to people, maybe it's me. Maybe I am a vampire. I was bitten by a vampire bat when I was in the afterworld with Angela." Now, that, of course, happened during the Angela miniseries. If you'd like to check out more about that, you can find my Angela miniseries videos in the Spawn miniseries playlist. However, Violator once again shuts him down, stating, "Dude, you're already dead. A vampire can only infect somebody who's living. You can get bit by them a million times over and you're never going to change." And then Spawn states, "Well, if it's not me and if it's not the costume, then what exactly is it?" And at this point, Violator states, "Listen, I don't know exactly what's going on with all that, but I can promise you it's not your costume. And, whatever's going on, you might want to do the same thing I'm doing and get the heck out of town. I'm going to head to Washington because there's nobody there but those wussy youngbloods, and they're so weak and pathetic that even you were able to take one of them out." Of course, he's talking about Spawn's battle with Chapel, as he basically just puts on a suit and then starts walking out of the sewer on his way to Washington. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons, these 2 pages. One, we now find out that there are many different levels to the symbiote that can be given to Hellspawns. So I assumed that there was only one, the K3 Mirlu that we saw given to Billy Kincaid after he died. However, as it turns out, that's more of like a run-of-the-mill one that's just given to random souls that are sent to hell to become basically foot soldiers in hell's armies. Whereas the purebreed symbiotes, the K-series ones, those are given to the general level spawns. So that's what Al has. And that his can actually change, because that's something else that Spawn is wondering about, is like, what's going on? Why am I hearing all these voices and whatnot? And Violator just casually says something that it's probably in its breeding cycle or whatever, which of course Spawn doesn't understand. But also, and this is very important as well, this is how we find out exactly how Violator got to Washington and why he was there. He was ditching town to get rid of to give the slip to Sansker. And this, of course, leads directly into the Violator versus Badrock miniseries. There's just one problem. The final issue of the Violator versus Badrock miniseries, which I just put out last week if you're watching this video in real time when it's published, came out the exact same month as this issue that we're looking at here. So the miniseries that this miniseries was supposed to lead into and set up was already finished by the time we found out exactly how the setup even started. So there's this giant continuity error in terms of the way that the story's being told, and why I was wondering how on earth, when I was doing the miniseries videos for the Violator versus Badrock miniseries, how on earth or why on earth Violator was in Washington, D.C. This is why, but you wouldn't have known that if you were reading all this stuff when it was originally published, or doing like I'm doing 25 years later, or 30 years later, trying to read all this stuff in chronological order as it was published, except that's not chronological order at all, because there was some kind of huge mistake made in the publishing dates, I'm assuming. Meanwhile, back at the police station, we see Twitch using a credit card to pick the lock to Sansker's office, as he's decided to open up his own little private secondary investigation. He goes to Sansker's desk and opens the drawer to find a bottle of the convenience store spray tan, and then finds a file where he finds many newspaper clippings that document a lot of Sansker's exploits and all of the monsters and whatnot that he's fought and slain in the past. However, he then starts to go more and more through this file and finds older articles. For instance, this one here dates all the way back to 1952, and Twitch is like, my goodness, like how in the world is this guy still looking like this at his age? But then as he continues to thumb through the file, he finds an old parchment paper with an illustration dating all the way back to 1704, implying that Sansker is in fact centuries old. And we also find out that his name was originally Jean Sanscour. I'm guessing maybe that's how you say it. I'm not the best at pronouncing French, and if I'm saying it wrong, I apologize. However, upon realizing all this, Twitch, is confronted by none other than Sansker himself, who was hiding in the office the whole time, covered in blood, as he grabs the back of Twitch's head and states, now, no foul language. And Twitch realizes that things are about to get real bad for him. In another part of the city, Spawn decides after speaking with Violator that he has to get his costume back. So he makes his way to a part of the city where he knows all of the hot-wired cars that have been stolen by teenagers get dumped, and he uses his necro energy to jumpstart the battery and drive the car to the part of the city where he dumped his costume. However, the signature green light of his energy exposes his location to a nearby police helicopter. The police inside of the helicopter decide to radio back to headquarters and let Sansker know that they've once again spotted the target and that he needs to come out so that they can capture him. Back at the police department, we see Sam enter Sansker's office stating, hey, they just spotted Spawn. The helicopter's on its way. Sansker says, oh, that's splendid. Thank you so much for helping me out. I'm going to go take care of this guy and be back before the sun's up. And Sam's like, yeah, well, let's hope that this is the guy that we're looking for, Sansker states, oh, no, it's definitely the right guy. I'll take care of this, no problem. Can you just close my door behind me? However, Sam decides to, instead of close his door, to once again go into his office the way that Twitch did and conduct a little bit of his own investigating. However, as he looks in, he happens to see a large blood stain on the floor in front of the cabinet at the back of Sansker's office. Upon opening the door, Sam is horrified to see his friend and partner Twitch Williams folded up like a pretzel, covered in blood with multiple broken bones and lacerations stuffed into this cabinet as he screams, medic, please God, somebody get a medic. As at this point, we find out what happened to Twitch and why he is in the hospital in the mainline series. The problem is that when we first saw Twitch all bandaged up and splinted up in the hospital recovering, that was 2 months before this issue got published. So you already had 2 full issues where Twitch was in the hospital with no real explanation as to why until now. I don't know, again, why none of this stuff was published in the right order, but it doesn't make any sense that we would have seen Twitch in this recovery state in the mainline series a full 2 months before we ever found out exactly what happened to him in the first place in a miniseries. As we see the helicopter flying through the air after it picked up Sansker, Sansker says, come on, guys, let's gun it. We got to catch this guy. They say, hey, we're going as fast as we can, and then they spot the car that Spawn is driving. The pilot says, we're catching up to him quick, and Sansker instructs the pilot to get as low to the car as possible. The pilot says, okay, but then suddenly realizes that Sansker is opening the door. He tells him, hey, don't do that, it isn't safe. And at this point, Sansker just leaps from the helicopter and smashes down on the roof of the car that Spawn is driving. Sansker then rips the roof of the car clean off as we see Spawn turn and realize that he's in trouble. Sansker wastes no time in beginning his assault as he punches Spawn clean in the face, stating, wow, where's your mask go? If that's what your face looks like, you should have never taken it off. He then continues his assault as he continues to chastise Spawn as well, stating, I'm really kind of disappointed in you American monsters. You don't put up the same kind of fight as the old world ones do. Stating that he fought a Lamia, excuse me. For anyone who doesn't know what a Lamia is, they're sort of like Gorgons. They're also from Greek mythology, and they have a very Gorgon-like appearance. For anyone who doesn't know what a Gorgon is, that's what Medusa is. But Lemurs are not quite the same. They don't possess the powers to turn people into stone, and they also feed exclusively on children, as the legend goes. But they're not entirely the same. Similar, just slightly different. And Sansker goes on to tell Spawn, I really expected more, and now that I see you for what you really are, you're not even a vampire. You're some kind of weird zombie thing, and zombies are one of the lowest forms of monsters that, the other monsters don't even pay any attention to and don't give the time of day to. At this point, Spawn's kind of tired of hearing Sansker's rambling, and is just kind of like, dude, why are you doing this? What is it? What's going on? And this is not looking good, as we've seen Spawn get completely outclassed once again, as Sansker has shoved his head through the windshield and is choking him up against the glass, with no one really driving the car either. I also find it interesting that Sansker is just leaping from helicopters and ripping the roofs of these cars off right in front of the police, who he's tried to maintain the illusion of being a human in front of up until this point. So it seems as though they might start to question, hey, how is this guy so strong and incredibly powerful? In response to Spawn's questions, Sansker simply states, I do this because I am Jean Sansker. I guess is how you say that. I'm guessing, folks. Again, French is not really my thing. I apologize if you're a French speaker and you're just, tearing your ears off trying to deal with me butchering your language. And he then states, I do this because I can, as he rips one of the doors of the car clean off and smashes Spawn in the face with it. He then asks Spawn, why were you heading toward the docks? Were you just trying to kill yourself? Well, I'm not going to stop you. And unfortunately, this is where I get off, as running water doesn't really agree with me. Again, at this point, they're kind of just spelling it out that Sansker is most likely a vampire, as he leaps off of the back of the car as we see the car drive off the end of the dock. Sansker says, make sure that when you get to hell, you tell them that I sent you, and that Heartless John sends his regards. And at this point, we find out that Sansker has a moniker of sorts that he's been going by and potentially been keeping a secret from everyone in New York City. On the final page of the story, we then see Spawn trapped inside of the windshield of the car as the car sinks down, dragging him with it. And Spawn just starts to panic, stating that he's in over his head and that he's sinking fast, going down, as we see that the story is to be concluded in the next issue. On the next page, we get Image info once again. Nothing to see here, just basic info about what was going on with Image Comics back in '95, so I won't bore you with that. We then reach the spawning ground, and the letters in this month's spawning ground are all basically revolving around Greg Capullo being brought on to the mainline Spawn series, and people either love it or hate it. One guy talks about how much he hates Greg's artwork and thinks that it's ruining the book. Another guy talks about how much he loves Greg's artwork and thinks it's fantastic that he got brought on. And also that second guy really starts to chastise the people who are complaining about Greg, stating that they're a bunch of teenage kids who don't know what they're talking about and blah, blah, blah. But this is where it's interesting, as Todd responds by stating that most of the really outspoken critics of Greg are actually older fans who have, basically stated that they don't like his work, but Todd thinks that it's more because they really just don't like change, which is quite possibly true. And, he said that a lot of his critics are worried that he has too many irons in the fire, what with the toy line coming out and him starting a brand new company there. And then also the idea that he's trying to get an animated series off the ground and potentially write a script for a movie. Keep in mind, this is before the Spawn movie came out. And they really believe that he's just pulling himself in too many directions, spreading himself too thin. And that's why he had to bring on Greg to, get the book out on time. And Todd actually puts that to bed, stating that he actually worked more hours at Marvel than he does currently in 1995, being on Spawn, on the board of directors at Image, and then also starting a toy company and doing everything else with the touring, going to different conventions and whatnot. And one of the main reasons he left Marvel was because of that grind. And, keep in mind, when Todd McFarlane left Marvel Comics, it was right after his oldest daughter was born. And he realized that he was not really prioritizing his family at that point. And he made a promise to his wife that when he started Image, he was not going to make his family, meaning her, and at that point, their one daughter, at this point in '95, he now has two daughters. He wasn't going to make them play second fiddle to his career, and he was always going to make a point to try and prioritize time with them. And that's a big part of why he brought Greg onto the team, was to make sure that he could fulfill that promise to his wife and his children. And I feel like that's pretty admirable, that he would, make sure that he always made time for them while also trying to build an empire around this new character that he created. And it really shows the devotion that Todd had to his family, and still does to this day. He's still married to his wife, and his children are now adults, obviously. But it's a thing that a lot of people mess up, where they focus so heavily on their career that they end up giving their family the shaft, and it leads to broken homes and divorce. And I got to admit, I admire Todd for making sure that didn't happen with him. We then reach the end cap section. I've talked about this one in particular in a few other videos, so I won't go into much detail here. This one's more or less just a rundown of why Todd Toys became McFarlane Toys, and explaining why the name change happened, and also gives a little bit of rundown about new toys that are coming out for '95. We then see a mail-away form where you can order 6 comics, one of them being autographed, some Spawn-mobile die-cast cars, a back alley play set for Spawn, and some Spawn trading cards. And then we get an advertisement for the Grifter and Bad Rock miniseries. I can't remember if I have every issue of this miniseries. If I do, I will make videos about it eventually. And if I don't, I'll be on the hunt for trying to finish it out so that I can make videos about it eventually. We then get an advertisement for Wizard issue number 50, which has a day in the life of Todd McFarlane featured inside of that book. I've never read it, but if you have and have any interesting tidbits from it, feel free to talk about it in the comments below. I'd like to know more. And on the reverse inside cover, we get an advertisement for Parts Unknown. As I've stated before when seeing this ad, I've never seen this book before in my life. I have no idea what Parts Unknown is about. And if you do, feel free to talk about it in the comments below, because I'd like to know more about it. And if I ever come across it, I'll probably pick it up just so I can make a video about it now that I know of its existence. And that was Spawn Blood Feud number 3. I actually think this issue is really good. The information that we get from it, one, the artwork is really top-notch. No complaints there. The information that we're given about Spawn's costume and the fact that there are multiple designations of it, which we didn't know prior to this issue, is really enlightening to learn that the K3 Mirlu that Billy Kincaid got is not at all the same thing as the K7 Letha that Spawn is wearing, and that his costume is actually a great deal more advanced and more powerful as a result of him being chosen to be a general of Hell in the War Against Heaven. My complaints are not really about this book, but more so the publishing schedule. As I stated inside, the fact that this whole series basically should have been almost done before they even published the first issue of the Violator versus Badrock miniseries seems basically inexcusable. And also the weird continuity error where Jason Wynn should have known of Violator's existence prior to Violator showing up in his office to inform Jason that he was going to be working for him from now on. That just seems kind of like a weird plot hole that shouldn't have happened. But again, that's kind of what happens when you run into one author doing the mainline series and then a completely different author doing this mini series, and wires get crossed because, you know, at this point in time especially, Image, it's kind of like each guy just has to handle his own business, and there's not necessarily an editor-in-chief who's really making sure that everything works together flawlessly in terms of storytelling. So my guess is that once Alan Moore submitted the script and the storyboards for the Blood Feud miniseries, Todd basically just read over everything and was like, okay, yeah, seems good, and missed the error in the publishing order for Jason Wynn, you know, striking up this deal, well, being forced into this deal with the Violator and acting as if he'd never seen him before when he should have known of his existence. And the whole thing with the Violator versus Badrock miniseries, I have no idea what happened there. I have no clue how they could have been that far off on the order of publishing those and getting them out. And it makes it even worse given how rushed the artwork felt in that miniseries when it should have been coming out after this miniseries, and it should have been that they would have had more time to work on it. But then again, maybe theirs was on time and this one's super late, and that's why none of it matches up. I don't know, but it's inexcusable in my opinion, and it should have been handled better than it was. But again, that's just my opinion. Your opinion may be that none of this is really all that big of a deal and it doesn't bother you at all. And if that's the case, it's okay, because everyone's entitled to their own opinions. If you enjoyed today's video, please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks for stopping by. Have a great day.